had gone to the Naval Academy, had spent time as a military officer, and was on this really phenomenal last tour that I did in the military. And in this command, we had all these different law enforcement entities and intelligence entities, every three-letter organization you could possibly think of. And they all asked me to apply. And I ended up taking the route of becoming an FBI agent, and was literally a few days from going to Quantico when my detailer called me out of the blue and said, "I've got some unfortunate news for you. Congress can't get their act together." He used stronger words than that. "And your class has unfortunately been recycled." And it ended up being closer to a 4 year, 3.5 to 4 year delay. And by the time that the opportunity represented itself, life had passed me by. I was psyching myself out so much before races, to the point that I would get physically sick.
Yeah.
Going into my sophomore year in high school, I started to approach practice as if it was a race. And it completely changed the way I've lived my life up until this day, because we all hear that Iverson quote, "You're talking about practice." Practice, right? We're talking about practice. Well, if you start treating, like Michael Jordan did, every day as if it's a game day, you don't have that anxiety anymore. To me, that evaporated. And instead, I learned and trained how to get myself into a zone of optimal anxiety where I was, at the time a race came about, able to put myself in a position of peak performance on a consistent basis. Satya Nadella. If you look at what he has brought into that company, he has really brought in a culture of growth, of constant learning, where he really rewards people for being curious about how to do things differently. But there's also a culture of deliberate action. And when you combine those things, meaning you're choosing growth time and time again, and then you're constantly taking actions that go in concert with that growth you're trying to creating, it's a perfect recipe for greatness. Because we think that in order to achieve these monumental things in life, it comes down to these grandiose moments. It really works by yourself being a constant learner and coupling that with intentional actions. A gardener leader approach is being very much the metaphor of a gardener. And just as a gardener needs to be there to plant the seeds and give nourishment, them sitting over the plants day in and night isn't going to make the plants grow any better. And so they really need to have this philosophy of being eyes on, but hands off. I first heard about this concept from General Stan McChrystal. He was in charge of all forces in Afghanistan. And there was no way that him in a situation room could understand what a Green Beret team was doing in a mountainside in Afghanistan and tried to micromanage their every one movement. So what he could do is he could make sure that those people who were fighting understood the mission. He could give them the best training that he possibly could. But when it came to them executing their mission, he had to be hands off. Been thinking a lot recently about Jimmy Carter. He's a Naval Academy grad. He was interviewing to become part of this burgeoning nuclear power program in the Navy. And this is back in the early 1950s. You had Hyman Rickover, who is the longest standing military officer of all time. He was known and feared. And he has this interview with the admiral, and the admiral is talking to him for about 2 hours. And as Carter is going through everything from navigation to propulsion systems to stoicism and everything else, he realizes that Rickover is a master in every single one of these topics. I mean, he is basically being put to task. Rickover asks him one final question, and he said, "While you were at the Naval Academy, did you always do your best?" And he said, "Upon thinking about it, no, I didn't." Rickover ended the conversation with, "Why didn't you?" A lot of people hear this phrase that they're living life on autopilot. And I think it's the wrong analogy for how so many of us are living our lives today. Because when we're on autopilot, we're typically doing the same thing, but it's generally taking us into a positive direction. I think the better metaphor for how so many of us are living our lives is a pinball. We let the world around us influence everything we do, and we get so distracted, just as you do in the game of pinball, by the noises, the lights in human life, social media, influencers, all these people who tell us we need to be more, that we're not intentional about learning how to play the game instead of it playing us. You can make the choice to live intentionally and live your life wisely, or you can choose to continue to live it as a pinball and live in ignorance and never achieve the potential that you could.
If you enjoy this podcast, please make sure to subscribe. And to stay updated on everything that the Action Catalyst is up to, make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Action Catalyst Podcast and on Twitter at Catalyst_Action. And thanks for listening.